Well, I want to say hello, good morning to our listeners from around the world. I want to welcome you to another edition of This Morning with Soulivity, broadcasting live from our studio right here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and on KMET 1490 AM radio in Southern California. We have a fantastic show. My name is Brian Wesley Johnson. I want to get to it as soon as possible, but I have to introduce to you my favorite and most wonderful, amazing co-hosts for Thursdays, Sheila Applegate and Dr. Chanel DeGuzman. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Brian.
Well, we're almost at the end of the week. And so I have to ask you, so Chanel, I haven't talked to you since before the holiday. How was your week, your holiday week?
Brian, so far it has gone well. Nothing, spectacular. Visited with family and friends. And because, our son is in Michigan or in Ann Arbor, we got to, kind of scoop him up and take him to the family outing in Ann Arbor.
Right.
So that was a nice treat for us, but relatively easy breezy, nothing spectacular. I did mention to you all, I did do a 3-mile run on Monday. So that was something I've never done in my entire life.
Wow.
So, yeah, so things are well. All is good. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Sheila, anything interesting happened since we last talked yesterday?
I had a beautiful walk this morning. And I guess that's about it.
It's like, hey, sometimes
beautiful
it's like
walk last night, a beautiful walk this morning.
Sometimes it's like that. You just keep it walking,
Well, that's really nice. You got it in this morning. I mean, that's beautiful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have been doing it later. That is the fun thing. I went, before. I love the morning birds. I love their early song. So I like getting up really early because they're quiet by 5:30 or 6. They quiet down. So yeah, it was nice to be at the park with just myself and
oh man. Yeah, it's almost like you have the world to yourself, huh?
Yeah, the moon was still up, but the sun was coming up, and I like the early morning.
Oh man, that's amazing.
And what about you, Brian?
Me, I just been, I've been kind of celebrating the new site coming up, which is we'll talk about in a little bit later, but still work to do and that kind of thing. It's been kind of like chill, and I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all being like laid back, laid back,
Sometimes.
Anyway, listen, everybody. As I said to you, we have a fantastic show. But before we get started, as always, want to remind our audience, listen, you can be part of this conversation. So just post your questions, your comments, your thoughts to our chats on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll include them during today's broadcast. As I said before, we have a fantastic show. And it's all about the latest Supreme Court rulings here in the United States. It's been the ending of this year's session. So they end in June and then they go in June and early July, and then they go into recess all the way until the beginning of the next fiscal year, which is in October. And so there's a lot of cases that came up. Sheila, you and I have been talking about it. Some other friends of mine, we've been talking about it. And I think what we came to understand was there were bigger meanings out of these rulings that I think people need to be aware of. I know, Sheila, you had this feeling, and Dr. Chanel, we were talking about this offline this morning. And so just wanted to kind of go through this because these were big deals. Would you say so, Sheila?
Well, yes and no. I
Mhm.
think each individual ruling could have ramifications, but if we see the big picture,
Yeah.
which I will talk about when you ask me, then I think that if we don't look at them as individual rulings, I think that we can have insight into a path that can lead us beyond the feeling of being suppressed and unempowered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is the whole point of our show, everyone. I mean, sometimes the information that we share can get a little deep and challenging, but the goal is to always have you walk away feeling empowered with the information that we share. So let's get started. So our first story comes from NBC News. In fact, all of our stories are going to be coming from NBC News. They've done a spectacular job on coverage of the Supreme Court over the last few weeks, and so we wanted to use them as our source for today's show. The Supreme Court's recent ruling in favor of an evangelical Christian web designer who refused to work on same-sex weddings didn't hinge on what now appears to be a request from a fake customer, legal experts said on Monday. In a case that wound up dealing a setback for LGBTQ rights, the focus on the potential customer first arose after web designer Lori Smith said in a previous court filing that someone named Stewart had reached out to her in 2016 about putting together a website for his marriage to a person named Mike. Now, the narrative was thrown into question last week after the New Republic published an article on Stewart, who denied ever having reached out to Smith. It quoted him saying he was a web designer who had been married to a woman for years. Now, the revelation has led to complaints on social media that the case should never have made it as far as the Supreme Court, with many arguing that Smith didn't have legal standing to bring the case if there weren't any customers seeking her services. So again, this has got many layers to it, and the question that I will put forth to each one of us is, what is the bigger picture that people need to be aware of in regards to this case, but then maybe the other cases that we're going to be talking about today? And so I'll open this up, Sheila. I'll go back to you for your thoughts.
So I think the fact that it is a sham is just it's a beautiful wink to all of us not to get caught up in the illusion of this power that is trying to be enforced upon us. A couple things resulted from that I'm aware of. One is that the LGBTQ community started to divide itself
Yeah.
um, and say, well, we were fine before transgender. People are having trouble with the transgender community. But the ruling wasn't about transgender either. So
Right.
it was about the lesbian and gay community. So both of these things show us that this is a path of trying to put us, the people who are actually living these lives and experiencing this country, against each other, because the power remains with the few elite when we fight against each other. And that's the theme that I see throughout the whole thing. The other part is that the Attorney General of Arizona made a statement following that, saying that if you feel like you have been discriminated in any way, then contact us and we will take your case, basically. So even
Wow.
though the Supreme Court may say this, that doesn't they don't really have a right to they don't have a means to enforce this except for through more rulings.
Right.
So we don't have to be terrified. We can join together and just say, no, we're not going down that path. That's my take.
Very important point, by the way, on the fact that that some states that have the anti-discrimination laws on the books, that they're still going to enforce it in their state. Dr. Chanel, what about you?
Well, I agree with Sheila regarding that big picture of there are certain people who have power and wealth, and then you let those who don't, and you pit races against races, classes against classes, like the split in the LBGT community. So then you're focused on things that are not as salient to what really runs this world. And I think the elite and the wealthy, are sitting back, agitating and stirring up. And I think we have to be more aware and, more insightful, not to get caught up in that and remain true to who we are. And the one thing I guess that comes to my mind is acceptance. When we talk about that big picture, you know, implications is still comes back to acceptance. Now, I will also say, and you all can help me with this, so this was a private
Hmm.
business,
Hmm.
correct? And so where does the, anti-discrimination laws, do they cover, these private entities as well? And it sounds like, Brian, in certain states, they do.
So yeah, right now, specifically when it comes to sexual orientation, and please, if do we have any attorneys or law experts that are listening in, please feel free to chime in on this and correct me if I'm wrong. But there is no federal statute in regards to sexual orientation, if I'm correct on that. But states can have laws that include what is included in our equal protection under the law, which is around certain protected classes. That has
Mhm.
been kind of substantiated in federal law, like certain cases. But they can include that in their state laws, and so there's like a patchwork um, uh, of different laws around the country. Some include sexual orientation, some don't. But the whole point is in that in this state, there was a anti-discrimination law that had that protected class of sexual orientation in it, where if you're a private business offering public services, that you cannot
Mhm.
discriminate on the basis of like gender, sex, sexual orientation,
Mhm. Mhm.
race, and all the other things. And so um, it's just interesting to me that um, just like there is no equal rights for women. I mean, ERA is not passed. Equal rights amendment has not passed. Yeah,
Ratified,
it's not
yeah.
been codified. So it has to be passed and then codified into law. So there's all these things that we all need to be paying attention to. Like it's just
Mhm.
assumed that things
Mhm.
like the right to vote is enshrined in federal law. It's not.
It's not.
It's
Right.
not, right?
Yeah, you could be sleep at the wheel, definitely sleep at the wheel.
Exactly. And so I think, to Sheila's point earlier, um, we've got to keep our eye on the bigger picture of all this. One, there are states that have things on the law, on the books, that do protect LGBTQ folks. It doesn't mean that those laws don't need to be strengthened. It doesn't mean that there needs to be um, um, more work to be done at the federal level. But we've got to keep our eye on the prize in terms of what is really equal here.
Mhm.
And if there's an equal rights amendment at the highest level, where
Mhm.
regardless of you know gender, sexual orientation, race, and everything else, that a person is a person is a person is a person, and that you can't discriminate against those folks, then great. Then great. I mean, that's the way I think it should be.
Yeah,
Go to another
yeah.
level. Just go to another level.
if we
Yeah.
keep dividing by category of people, it's going to be in the discussion forever. When in
Absolutely.
reality, it should be, you cannot discriminate on any of these.
Absolutely. Listen, we're going to take a break, let you guys kind of like, get warmed up because we got more to talk about here. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the affirmative action case that was just ruled as well, and talk about what is legacy and that kind of thing. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in about 30 seconds.
6 years ago, when I started Soulivity, my vision was to support everyone in improving their life through the discovery of their passion and purpose, so they could become the best version of themselves, to battle fear and ignorance, and create a better world today. Get inspired to live your passion and purpose. Visit Soulivity.com now.
And we're back with more of This Morning with Soulivity. We are talking about the latest Supreme Court rulings here in the United States, but we're taking this up a notch, right? With the ladies, we're taking this up a notch to looking at what's the bigger picture here. And the next story that we have comes from also NBC News, where we're talking about the affirmative action case, where the Supreme Court actually struck down affirmative action at Harvard University, which could have implications across the United States. But a civil rights group is challenging the legacy admissions at Harvard University, saying the practice discriminates against students of color by giving an unfair boost to the mostly white children of alumni. The practice of giving priority to children of alumni has faced growing pushback in the wake of last week's Supreme Court decision ending affirmative action in higher education. The NAACP added its weight behind the effort on Monday, asking more than 1,500 colleges and universities to even the playing field in admissions, including by ending legacy admissions. And just to give some information, some factual information that's part of the story, records revealed that 70% of Harvard's donor-related and legacy applications are white. And being a legacy student makes an applicant roughly 6 times more likely to be admitted. So just to put a finer point on that. What say you guys? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, I'm going to go with, this is an even clearer example of this, because if this really was about creating a fair entrance into these colleges and universities, then we would be removing the legacy admissions, because just because you're an alumni or you pay a lot of money, that doesn't have anything to do with what the person has achieved,
Right.
regardless of where they were starting from. It's the logical thing to focus on removing if you truly are trying to create equality in this setting. So the fact that they didn't, it's a reminder, you never kick down, meaning never attack or blame somebody who has less power in the institutional systemic picture than you do. Right.
What say you, Dr. Chanel? You just had your son now it's a Wolverine. I have to say that with some zest. What are your feelings about this?
Well, Brian, I'm coming to terms with it all. But for me, I'm a first generation student. So I did attend the University of Michigan essentially on my own, meaning nobody in my family could really show me how to get admitted and all of that. And fortunately, I graduated. But when you think about even the graduation rates of the races, there are disparities. And you look at the number of Asian kids and white kids who graduate, it's something like 62% and 63%. Like Asians have the highest graduation
Right.
rates, followed by whites, followed by Hispanics, and followed by Black
Mm-hmm.
students at 30%. And our graduation into from higher ed into society leads to, our highly skilled workforce.
Mm-hmm.
We are at a
Yeah.
disadvantage. Students of color face systemic
Yeah.
barriers, including just long-standing
Yeah.
segregation, lower family
Yeah.
wealth. We have lower resources, and so our access to college is not the same as other
Yeah.
races. And so, not to have the access to even level, and I don't even know if we can level the playing field. We are so far behind in that regard because of the systemic barriers or systemic racism that is inherent in our, institutions, and especially our institutions of higher ed. You know, casting this down just to me is it's when and how will we
Yeah.
ever
Yeah.
to have a level playing field where we are all having equal access to the resources, to the wealth in this society? Or is this always going to be this tremendous gap? And if I'm not mistaken, Brian, and hopefully somebody can correct me, but I believe African Americans have been slaves in this country longer than we have been
Yes.
freed. And so there is such a disparity from so far ago when and you continually, chop down access so that, certain people can remain the
Yeah.
elite and remain
Right.
wealthy. So
I agree with both of you. I think that both of you have very important uh, aspects of this ruling. I I can't help but think about look at this from a historic standpoint, where you know after the Civil War there was Reconstruction.
Mhm.
That you had
Mhm.
you had a spike in not only black people getting more educated, right? But during this time is when HBCUs were formed, right? Um, but you also had a spike in black wealth as well as a spike in black political power, where you had people in Congress. And then there was a backlash with Jim Crow, and
Mhm.
all that went down the drain. I mean, there were certain pockets of black people that kind of were able to make it through with higher levels of wealth, but places like Tulsa and places in Rosewood and
Rosewood.
other places
Mhm.
were burned to the ground, and that wealth was gone. And so here's another example that, we have the 60s, part of the civil rights acts and that kind of thing was affirmative action for specifically black students who suffered very unique and specific kind of systematic discrimination that was different than any other race. Yes, there were hardships of Asians and hardships of Hispanics and that kind of thing, but the majority of the of the slaves that were doing labor and all that were African American, and we can't get past that. And so here it's not even 100 years later, like 60 years later, and people are
Right.
saying, oh well, everything is equal now, right? I mean, basically what
Right.
Justice uh Ketanji Brown Jackson was saying, in terms of, you can't mandate this by fiat. You have to put energy into stopping this kind of thing. And so I look at it from the point of view that, listen, if we're going to make this equal, or we're going to try to give people an equal shot, then make it an equal shot, which is what affirmative
Mhm.
action was all about.
Right.
It was remediation of the effects of slavery. Was it perfect? No, but it was a really, really, really strong attempt at trying to move the country forward. Now, the other thing about this is that people confuse affirmative action with purely it being a diversity thing. It's not. Affirmative action, as it was written, was specifically for African Americans and for them to get a leg up and for them to get basically like part of reparations around the 300 or 400 years of slavery that we were put on.
Right.
That leads into Black people coming into our higher education system where their stories can now be shared with the masses. That's diversity, right? Where other people can understand where you come from, where you've been, what, and that kind of thing. And then through that diversity can add more to the success and the prosperity of all America as a whole.
Right. Brian, just one
Yeah.
note, and I don't know if this can come up, but there is this talk also about athletes of color. So where does this come in as far as, the contributions that they make, the revenue that they bring to our university?
See, that's the other thing about
And
this, right?
what is that to say about, this striking down of the affirmative action?
And I'm glad that our next story talks about student loans because it goes from one end to the other. It doesn't affect it at all because, legacy and sports related admissions make up for the overwhelming majority of admissions into most schools, right? But the sports system, the people who are playing sports are still a very small percentage. And then if you include that to be African Americans, it's even a smaller percentage. But those people bring in literally billions of dollars into the NCAA, right? And other sports related organizations that are supposed to be over college sports. Literally billions, not millions, billions. And so now you got to understand from that perspective, like, okay, well, we're getting some crumbs in terms of actually some Black people getting an education where, it's like a minority of a minority of a minority, but they're making money off of our backs.
Yes.
And so again, what does admissions need to look like? In fact, I remember I think it was the president of the NEA, the National Education Association. I can't remember her name. She was talking about the fact that maybe this is the biggest picture is maybe we just need to change the way our system of education works, because you can tie this all the way back to like we still funding our schools through property taxes. Well, wealthier districts have better schools. Poor districts have poorer schools. So, how do you kind of balance that out? And again, to what Sheila was talking about earlier, like the rich and the powerful in our country, they want their kids to be more educated than anybody else. They don't want them to compete.
Yeah,
they don't want them to compete. So,
and I want to make clear that I do think that, it is important to make this adjustment and for the systemic racism that's been a part of it. I know the colleges and universities around me, and I don't think this is throughout the country, but the Native Americans are able to attend for free because it's their land. And that was part of the treaty. So,
Right.
In each of these situations, we do have to continue that reprobation.
Reparations.
I can't get that word today.
Reparations.
Thank you. I knew it was going to come out wrong when I started.
Okay.
Reparations, it's got to be, we have to keep our eye on that and not, again, fight against each other. The serfs fighting against each other while the royalty continue
Absolutely.
on, right?
Absolutely. I feel like I want to just kind of continue talking about this as we move into our next story. but this is really about power and money and control. I mean, I can't help but think that, you know, again, the the student who brought the case for affirmative action was found they're a minority of Asian people who actually believe in affirmative action. And it was just kind of out of the blue. And again, Sheila, it's like pitting one minority against another minority, but you're taking your eye off the bigger picture of, fair, equal access to higher education, which is not what we may say that, but that's not what our system is. It is very unequal. It is not equitable. And the more money you have, the easier it is for you to go to a good school. And that has been the case regardless of whether where you're white, black, Asian, Hispanic. The more money you have, the more likely you're able to have your child go into higher education. And even then, if you're a minority, it is still difficult because you're not legacy. There's a very, very small percentage of minorities that are legacy. And you're fighting for anywhere between 10 to 20% of the slots at a major institution of higher learning, because the rest of it's gone already.
Already, yeah.
Why don't we go into this next story, because it's like almost like part of the bigger picture here, where again, this is all part of the stories over the last week or so, where the Supreme Court basically killed the student loan relief plan that a lot of us, including myself and my wife, have been looking forward to enjoying. And just to kind of like speed this process up here, basically the court rejected the Biden administration's arguments that they could use a 2003 law called the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act, or HEROES Act, where the government can provide relief to recipients of student loans when there is a national emergency. It allows the government to act to ensure people are not in a worse position financially as a result of the emergency. Now, Chief Justice Roberts said that the HEROES Act language was not specific enough, writing that the court's president requires that Congress speak clearly before a department secretary can unilaterally alter large sections of the American economy. Now, just to be clear here, y'all. It said a national emergency, and Congress specifically throughout the years has never had language defining what that national emergency is. Just to kind of put that out there, that in FEMA it's not defined in a certain way, and other agencies it's not defined in a certain way. So just wanted to let you guys know that factually. Sheila, what do you think about this one? What's the bigger?
Well, the bigger picture is the rich people who have the power are, getting and celebrating major tax breaks for people who already don't pay taxes. And they're celebrating the fact that us lowlifes still are paying our student loans. So, that's one big picture. The other one is, my understanding is that Biden had a second plan, and that's already starting in action, and so that perhaps he didn't actually expect this one to go through,
Right.
but used it as a way to see what they were going to say, so that the next one could come through. So there is a little bit of nuances to that too, because as much as I want mine finally now just my parent loans, which fall under it, to be reduced, but I finally paid off my student loans, but then the idea is like, I guess there is a part of me that's like, well, do we want other major things happening under a emergency relief thing, that could go against us? So there's that to be considered. But at the same time, when you mentioned FEMA and they'll get emergency things can clear out debt for banks and all kinds of things. So why not us?
Right. Exactly. Dr. Chanel, what do you think?
So I guess I'm circling. It goes back to let's not fight against each other.
Right. Exactly.
Well, yeah, and I'm just looking at a few statistics, Brian, and this is probably obvious. I know it's a lived experience. I know for myself. So Black and African American college students owe an average of $25,000 more in student loan debt than white college graduates. 4 years after graduation, Black students owe an average of 188% more than white students borrowed. Black and African American students borrowers are the most likely to struggle financially due to student loan debt, making monthly payments of $250. And then this is not surprising based on the Asian graduation rate. Asian graduate students are the fastest to repay their loan debt and the most likely to earn a salary that exceeds their student loan debt balance. So these are just some statistics that really highlight the need for this. But then, is it my understanding to you all that the Supreme Court basically overrode congressional power for the HEROES Act, like usurped it? And so there's a power dynamic just like right there, that I don't know, how that will be. If that will not be rectified, apparently, unless, like you said, Sheila, maybe Biden is coming out with something else to rectify. But just to know that one body that is supposed to be the I don't know, just to exert that kind of power is something that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Absolutely. Just to let people know this too, there's a very important statistic, and I'll try to find it and post it, on the rate of tuition increase over the last 30 years. Actually, 40
That's
years.
Crazy. Yeah.
So, you guys ready for this number?
No.
Yeah, me either. I don't even want to tell you guys. The year over year, since 1980, tuition has increased, specifically in the last 10 years or whatever. It's increased over almost 1,200%.
That's crazy.
And so and it's like, if you look at the decades, the first, from 80 to 90, it was something like 100% increase. From 90 to 2000, it was something like 200 and something percent increase from 90 to 2000. Then from 2010, it just went off the chart. It was like 400%, then another 500%. So colleges and universities are charging a hell of a lot more than they did in past history, and that it's Gen X and Gen Zers that are the majority of the loans right now, because of the fact that the tuition is so high. And so, part of this too is, what are we paying for? Right? Especially when,
I think I feel like I feel like the whole system is gonna get overwhelmed. The college it's not gonna divide us as much, because I don't think people are getting their money's worth.
Absolutely.
In many situations.
And I did find that article, so I'm going to post it into the thing. So I just want people to understand that that's one aspect of this, right? So just giving some relief during it was a pandemic. What other, that's the thing that I don't understand. Well, I do understand it. why would the Supreme Court rule that what Biden did was not specific enough when when a pandemic was happening, not just an epidemic, a pandemic was happening where no one could go to work. Most cities and states were shut down, right? You had to work from home
Right.
for a year and a half at a minimum. Some people had to be at home longer than that. If that's not a national emergency, I don't know what is.
Right.
Well, and it
And it really,
exacerbated the disparities
Yeah.
too, just across the
Right.
board. Go ahead, Sheila.
no, that, and also it really hit the kids of that, or the young adults of that age group, because having
Right.
kids who one had just just graduated, and one was in between, graduated and then went on to a PhD during it. Their education was affected during it, and then also, so my daughter, the trajectory of career. She was in screenwriting, and everything shut down. Like a lot of the
Right.
things got shut down for 2 years, and now she's catching up with things. So
How many
it did
people
affect
are
people.
the unemployment rate jumped really high. So again, the law says that when there's a national emergency, the Secretary of Education can enact policies with the administration's help. I mean, like regulations or whatever, to ensure people are not in a worse position financially as a result of. So if you take out national emergency and put COVID pandemic in there, doesn't it make sense?
Absolutely.
If people are out of work for almost 2 years, would it make, I know some people were like, oh, well, they shouldn't, if I paid my student loans, other people should pay their student loans. Well, you paid your student loans before there was a national emergency. Great for you. But when there's a national emergency and you're
And
out of
before it
work,
was,
yeah,
yeah.
And my guess is some of those people benefited when the Heroes Act was done during the financial crisis, because during the financial crisis, people received certain relief from their student loans during that period. So this is anything different. It's just, it was more major. And so people having to come back and now pay 2 years worth of student loan payments in lump sum when they couldn't pay it before because they were either unemployed or underemployed. It's just cruel. That's just cruel.
And so, Brian, what do you see also as the bigger picture, specifically in this perpetuation of this, which is going to continue to be contributions to the wealth gap?
I think the bigger picture is, and I think Sheila, you kind of was the wink, wink, nod to it, where, like COVID relief with like PPP loans, right? PPP loans dwarf the forgiveness for that dwarfs this, right? And so, and some of those loans were for large corporations
Absolutely.
who could have made it through without receiving a PPP loan, right? And so they get relief because there's a national emergency, and under basically the same language, right? But middle class and lower middle class and poor people who have student loans who need the relief can't get the relief because the law's not specific enough.
Right.
That's the big picture. Just ask yourself, what is that about?
Yeah.
And who benefits from this amount of money being on the table still? And it's our financial system. It's the people who run that finance, those loan companies and all that kind of stuff. Those servicers,
Mhm.
they're the ones who are going to make a lot of money off of this amount of debt being right there, because
Mhm.
basically it gets wiped clean. And again, I think just want to remind people. I think Sheila, you brought it up earlier, that Biden is going to invoke the 1965 Higher Education Act. It's a different law that one at um, that let's see, it's a different law than the one at issue in the Supreme Court cases, which some experts have said gives the Education Department broad authority. All the proposal could take time to implement. So we'll see what happens. But I think Biden's going to move on this. I think he's already said that he's going to um, basically allow people to have some type of forbearance or something like that, where or grace period. It'll be like a grace period over the next 12 months from the time at which we're supposed to be paying it back,
Which is September,
which is
right?
October, right?
October. Okay.
Yeah. So which is October. So listen, wow, great discussion today, guys. You know, um, lot to think about, right? A lot to think about around all these different cases and what's happening. I know it can get a little deep and
Yes.
a little heavy.
A little
Yeah,
heavy.
because there's all these different things that are happening. But I think, ladies, I think that we need to talk about these things in from a perspective to keep people aware of all the bigger picture, and that's what we're talking about today, the bigger picture of everything that's happening and all the information that may not come out on other night media news networks. So
Mhm.
just keep your eye on that. I mean, always, like, things happen for a reason. I mean, the court cases that got pushed up to the United States Supreme Court didn't just happen just because of happenstance. A lot of these things were happening by design.
Well, and Brian, when you say by design, Trump appointed
That
3
correct.
justices.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
another
you could
big
always
picture, right?
a big picture, yeah, and all of that, could just be in order. This is just carrying out by design, you know, from that, even from those
Exactly.
appointments.
Exactly. So your vote counts, which is a bigger, your vote counts no matter what your age is. If you're eligible to vote. That is your voice. um, be discriminating in terms of what the implications are from that vote, and then keep yourself aware. Listen to us, listen to NPR, listen to other, worthy news outlets that I listen to. And some of the national media is good too. Don't want to discriminate them, like NBC News, who we got our stories from. Thank you, NBC News. Um, but yeah, why don't we move to some final thoughts? I know this was packed full of different things today, and then we'll do some shameless plugs. Sheila, any final thoughts you're thinking about?
Yes. First, Dr. Chanel, I liked when you brought up the wealth gap, and I think that is the key, the bigger of the bigger. I mean, we could go all the way up to the spiritual level, but just sticking into the practical, we need to remember that this is about a wealth gap and an attempt to divide us, because we are not as powerful when we're divided. So if we can remember that we're not fighting against each other, that we have power when we come together and we claim that we are going to live the life we deserve here as in this country, and that we're not going to allow that 1% to take all the power.
Hello.
Absolutely, Sheila. Very well said. And for me, Brian, it's what can we do as we continue to evolve into our higher selves and to go after the things that we want and make it happen. It's also, for me, entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
That is one answer to the wealth gap. How can we put more resources in addition to education, which is super important, but also entrepreneurial education that can have an impact in your income and your wealth attainment. And so I want to make a plug for us entrepreneurs to continue to make those contributions and then teach those because it's not taught in the primary schools, to keep entrepreneurship as one of our options that we have to increase our standing in our wealth attainment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I'll just kind of like say my final thought around this is go reread Martin Luther King's A Letter from a Birmingham Jail. I think that letter, simple letter, is a master class on like anytime that these kind of laws and these kind of things are happening, and are things just or not just? Are things fair or not fair? And and who's supporting that? So go reread that letter from a Birmingham jail. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let people go, and I might even put the thing in the chat so
Yeah, please,
so
please
that people
do.
can read it. Quickly, we'll do a couple of shameless plugs here. Sheila, you've got a Matrix of Illumination coming up.
Yes, I'm very excited about that. This Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, I will be on Aspire for the Matrix of Illumination. We will look at the bigger picture as we connect with the divine and meditate and discuss what's on your mind. So join us.
Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. And we'll go to you, Dr. Chanel. Of course, you have your lovely coaching sessions that are always available.
Yes, please take advantage. Please take advantage, especially during the summer when we have somewhat of a reprieve to really go a little deeper and to figure out what you really want and figure out what is getting in the way and how can we create a plan towards moving forward.
All right.
So those are available to you.
Fantastic. And really, really quickly, please go follow us on social media, along with checking out the new Soulivity.com. Woo woo. New other things are there. So go check it out at Soulivity.com/this morning. Follow us on social media, join our mailing list, and subscribe as well. Listen, guys, on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you for joining again us for another great This Morning with Soulivity. This is how we do it every weekday at 8 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. This is for our live broadcast, or you can join us and listen at 9 a.m. Pacific time, Thursdays and Fridays on KMET 1490 AM radio. So with that, we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
This work is subject to copyright owned by Affinity Global LLC. Any reproduction or republication of all or part of this is expressly prohibited unless Affinity Global LLC has explicitly granted its prior written consent. All other rights reserved.